Hello everyone, this is Winter Alliance and I'm back with another video. So I got a request a while back to make a sound that evolved from a heavy bass sound into a more melodic synth pad. And I figured that this would be an interesting sound design challenge, so this is what I came up with and I'll be showing you guys how to make it today in the video. So if you like what you hear, make sure to stick around. I will also put the Combinator patch as a download in the video description, so if you want to follow along with the patch that way, you can do so as well. So the sound is pretty complex, so instead of showing you step by step to recreate it, I'm going to be showing you just the patch itself and then explaining what I did specifically with the sound design settings. Because I want to keep this video from being too long. Alright, so this is how I made the patch. So I started off with making a Maelstrom, and then later in adding a sub bass so I'd have a bit more control over the sub frequencies themselves. So for this Maelstrom patch, it starts off pretty simple. It's a square times 16 waveform, just to kind of get a nice rich wave, with the octave dropped at -2, and then the decay and sustain all the way up. And then I'm just setting this directly to the final output of the synth, so not through any of these shapers or filters themselves. The next thing that I'm doing is taking a sawtooth waveform with the scent moved up to 30, just to kind of phase it and detune it off this one a little bit. Then I also dropped the octave down to -2. In contrast to the last one, I sent this one through the shaper right here on saturate with an amount of 105. And I also added in some modulation with a slow sine wave rate at 89 and the pitch at 2. And if you want to hear that saw waveform solo, it sounds like this. So that kind of adds a fatness, and then this sort of fills it back out. The last things that I did was I turned it to monologato mode and then put the range at +5 for the pitch bend. And then we'll cover all the automation afterwards because it'll be a little bit easier to go over then. Alright, so the next thing that I did was I ran it into the effects units on an Antidote synthesizer. It looks kind of complicated, but all that's really going on here is I route it into this external audio input, which you can see here on this whole diagram. It runs it into the effects, and then it just comes out the normal master out. So all this is really doing is adding audio in here, running it through these effects units, and then spitting it back out. So the first thing I did was I added some equalization. Nothing too crazy. I just cut out a little bit the high frequency, cut out some mids at around 1.5 kilohertz, and that just sort of scoops things out and makes it sound a little bit clearer sounding. So it's not a very substantial change, but it just kind of helps it sound a little bit cleaner. And then the main thing that I did here was I used this phaser, which sounds like this, which helps give it a little bit of stereo movement. It's a 4-stage filter, frequency at 97, spread at 100 because we want it to be really wide. Then the feedback's at 19, rates at 1/4, and the modulation is at 77%. And then I think that's just at its 50% default setting. And then it's only at 13% of a dry wet because we just want a slight phase to add some stereo width. The next thing I did was I added in this chorus, which sounds like this, which adds in quite a bit of stereo width. Dry wet's pretty high, it's at 31. Left to right offset is at 77. Feedback is at 0. Depth at 61. Rate at 0.48 hertz. And the delay is at 24.1 milliseconds. So that just adds a nice chorus effect that widens out the sound. Because the trick to getting these nice Reeses and then later turning into a pad is to make a really nice wide, lush sound. Okay, so the next thing that is going on here with the Antidote is some compression. Ratio is at 11.5 over 1, so it's a pretty extreme ratio. It's almost a limiter. Threshold is at -14. Attack is as slow as it can possibly go because we just want a really fat sound. And then the release is up at 105. Okay, so altogether, the Antidote sounds like this. So it's a lot fatter sounding, it's really in your face, but it's also very wide because of these stereo effects. Without it, it would sound like this. And with it, so it really fills things out. Okay, so the next thing I did was I added in an echo on the warm echo preset. And what we'll do is we'll come back to this for the automation of that sort of pitch down effect that you hear in the introduction. And I'll show you kind of why I modulated what I did. But yeah, so just add in the preset now, and we'll come back to it later, and I'll kind of show you what's going on. Okay, so the next thing I did was I added a short reverb. I started off with the Modern Studio A preset, but I edited things pretty heavily, so I'll just kind of run over this preset. So what it sounds like is like this. It's kind of a short, really wide, lush sounding reverb. I have the pre-delay up at 13 milliseconds to sort of add a delay to the sound. It's a 1.5 second reverb, so it's pretty long. And then the density is really low, so it kind of breaks the reverb apart and kind of adds an almost like granular sound to it. And that's a very dark sounding reverb, which kind of affects the high frequencies, and I don't know, just kind of makes it sound darker. If it sounds really bright, it sounds like this. And then the dark reverb sounds like this. It's kind of muffled sounding. Then I just brought the high cut all the way up, so we have all the frequency ranges that are being fed into the reverb. The next thing that I did was I added in more early reflections than reverb. Reverb sounds like this. And then early reflections are the sort of weird delay sound. Just kind of makes it sound wider, so I wanted more of that sound just to kind of make it sound wide. Diffusion's at high, modulation's at random, and the early reflections are set to small. And the reverb mix is at 20 because we don't want it to be too crazy. And usually for bass sounds, you wouldn't want to add a reverb, especially if there's a sub bass, but because we're band splitting things and adding in a separate sub bass later, you can do this without it sounding too muddy. Alright, so the next thing we have going on is a etch red filter. This isn't doing that much, honestly. It just adds some distortion with the shred mode, so it's about 8.95 dBs. And then we have the fatty filter. Oh yeah, and this is in post right here as well. So this distortion is taking place after this filtering, as done before. So we have the fatty filter, which is just a bandpass mode filter with a little bit of frequency modulation of 58. And then this doesn't really matter where it's set because we'll be modulating it later. And then we have a state variable filter with a 2-pole notch filter, which sounds like this. So it's really phasey. Yeah, resonance is up to 25. And then we're running these filters in parallel as opposed to just having them together. So we have a little bit of the compressor going on with the hard setting, so it's just a very heavy compression. And then I just took the level down because this tends to get pretty loud. Okay, so that doesn't do too much to the sound, just adds a little bit of phasiness. And then these 3 filters that we do with Thor are what's going to create the main body of the sound. So it looks pretty crazy, but the settings are pretty simple. So if we go ahead and open it up, what you can see is the first thing is running into audio input 1 and 2, and then out just like the regular synthesizer. And all that is doing is you run audio in 1 and audio in 2, and then just run it into your filter 3 left and right at 100%. So all it's doing is taking the audio input signal and running it into this filter. Now if we look at what we have as a setting, we have a state variable filter, a little bit of drive at 89. It's on a bandpass mode, and this one is the most dramatic sounding of all the filters. It sounds like this, which when paired with the other filters gives it a lot of character. Then we also just have a chorus. I think it's the default settings, or maybe I took the feedback down, and a dry wet of 20. So just go ahead and copy that patch over, plug it in the same way, and then we have a notch filter. So the notch filter is a pretty subtle sounding filter. It's essentially just a scoop that you can modulate the kind of scooped frequency, but it kind of adds a nice phasey sound to the bass. And with this knob right here, you can adjust it from being a more low-pass sound or more high-pass sound, just kind of adjusting the character of the filter, and I have it sort of going more towards the high-pass, so an amount of 66. So if I was to show you this filter, it sounds like this. So again, kind of a subtle phase. And then the last filter that we have going on here is just a simple high-pass filter. You could do this with EQ as well. It's just cutting out everything that's below 158 hertz, because that's the sort of the sub-bass region, and we're going to be adding in a sub-bass later, so we don't need those frequencies in this main modulated bass. Okay, so the next thing that we have is just some processing. This is just a high cut, really nothing crazy. You could do this with a filter or any other EQ, really. It's cutting everything out above 15,000 hertz, so it's just like a low-pass filter, so it's nothing really crazy. And then we have a Reason vocoder, and this is kind of adding a crispy sound to the synth. So we have it on 8-band mode, and the shift is at 53. So that sounds like this. It's kind of glitching out there, sorry. But with it, it sounds a lot crispier. So yeah, this is an effect that I really like the sound of on basses. It just kind of makes things sound a little bit crispier, a little bit more compressed, even though it's not really a compression. It just kind of sounds that way. Okay, so the next thing we did was some distortion. Pretty simple Scream 4 settings. We have some tube distortion, damage is at 35, P1's all the way up, and the parameter 2 is at 30. Next, we go ahead and go to this cut section, cut out some of those highs, and then bring the level down, just because we don't want the high frequencies to be too overwhelming with the synth. So just kind of, I'm just slowly cutting high frequencies to keep it from building up too much. So that sounds like this. So just add some volume and makes things sound a little bit fatter. The next thing that I have going on is a decam bus compressor. It's pretty subtle compression, really. It's mainly just to kind of tame the peaks of the sound whenever it's modulating. Attacks at 30 milliseconds, releases at 0.6 seconds, ratio is at 4:1, and the threshold is at -11. So really all this does is kind of tame things whenever they get too out of hand with the modulation. So the next thing we have going on is a maximizer. And I have the limiter turned on here with the input gain slammed, but that's honestly just because it's such a quiet signal. This isn't really doing much. The part that is, though, is this output gain is put to 6 decibels and then run into the soft clip with an amount of 46, excuse me. And this just kind of adds a sort of strange analog clipping to the sound. It just really fattens it up, which I quite like this. I quite like the sound of it on bass. Okay, so the next thing we have going on is some equalization. And these first two ones are just removing some of the whistling sounds of the frequencies. And all you really do for this is you boost it up and then move this parameter around until you hear a whistling sound. And then you, with a really thin Q, just go ahead and cut that frequency out. And by using these sort of surgical bands as opposed to something wider like this, you can get a much cleaner, fatter sound, but still remove the problematic frequencies. So the first one is at 970 with a gain of -9 and a Q all the way up of 32. And the next one is at 2.3, gain is 8.6, -8.6, and then the Q is at 19. And this is like what those sound like right here. So whenever you boost them, they kind of become this resonant whistling sound. So whenever you're designing a synth and you want to EQ it to kind of make it sound a lot nicer, just boost that frequency up and then move the frequency around with a thin Q until you get those whistling sort of resonant frequencies, and then just remove them. So the next one is 321, the gain of -12, -13, and Q of 14.9. And then we have a real subtle one at 7,000 hertz with a gain of -5.1 and a Q of 16.6. And then the next two EQ cuts we have is first this just high pass cut, similar to the EQ that we had up top with the Black Knight EQ. And then we have this mid cut at 1.2 hertz with a gain of -10 and a Q of 5.1. And this kind of just adds a nice phasiness to it. So without it, sounds like this. So it just kind of scoops things out and makes it sound a little bit more of that sort of phasey Reese sound. Okay, so that's the first synth sorted. Next, all I've got going on is a sub, just as is like a separate signal. So we have a sine wave, same attack and sustain settings as earlier, same pitch bend range, mono legato, running that into some compression, same attack and release settings as before. It's a pretty heavy compression, to be perfectly honest. It's about like almost 6 dBs of reduction, so it's pretty extreme. Some people like a lot of compression on their basses, some don't. Just kind of depends. Just play with your sine waves and see what you like the sound of. And then I'm also saturating it a bit. And let me go ahead and solo the signal out real quick. Okay, so this is what it sounds like soloed. So without that compression. So it's a little bit more punchy and in your face with it. Okay, so the next thing that I've got going on is this vocoder. And this just kind of adds this sort of strange crispiness to it. And it's on 4-bay mode. I didn't touch the shift at all, because if you do, you'll lose your sub-bass frequencies. So make sure not to mess with that too much. And this is kind of a personal preference. I've just kind of grown to like this sound, so I went ahead and put it on there. Okay, and then up top, I have just some more compression, the same settings as that previous one, This just kind of brings the whole sound and glues it together with the sub. And then I just have this EQ that's automated to turn on and off whenever the sort of pad section drops in. So I've got a low cut going on here, so everything's kind of put to the bottom, and a frequency cut at 191 hertz, negative 11 gain on the gain right here, and a Q of 14.1. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the modulation that I did for this sound. The first one was a simple level modulation. This is just the volume of the volume fader in the mixer, just to kind of create a sidechain effect. So you could do that either with like a compressor or with a volume modulation like I did here. And then we have a simple note right here. I think it's a G sharp 2. And then we have the chords from the other part. And then we have this like really short stab right here, which creates the sort of pitch bend effect that we'll show you later. Then I have a pitch down, and then a pitch down every few bars here to kind of add a little bit of variation. Okay, so now for that modulation. So the first one that I did was whenever this pad section drops in, I took the oscillator A gain and brought it down. If you remember back to this sound, the oscillator A is the supersaw oscillator, and it sounds like this. And whenever I had those chords, it sounded a bit too overwhelming, so I just brought the volume down, and then I turned mono legato off, which is this button right here, and then that's so I can play chords as opposed to individual notes. And then I also brought the octave of oscillator A up just a few so it's just one extra octave. And that kind of just adds a nice high frequency tonality to the synth. Kind of makes it sound a little bit more pad-like. And then with the sub, I also just turned the mono legato off as well, so it can play multiple notes. Okay, so now for this filter modulation. So this filter modulation here is just repeated over. I just copied it over a bunch of times. And the best way that I've found to create this sort of sound is to take the filters and then just press play with the note going back and just move it up and down until you find something that's relatively interesting. And then record it into your sequencer, and then go back and clean up those edits and then kind of mess with it and copy it over and come up with a bunch of different ones. That's kind of the fastest way to create these sounds, really. It does take some time, but it's definitely worth playing with. So we've got the first one that's kind of just going up and then down, and that's the bandpass. And then the notch filter is basically doing the same thing, but it's a lot less intense, just to kind of add a nice phasiness to the sound. And then the main one that's creating the main character of the sound is this bandpass filter, which, if we remember, is right here in this Thor unit. And if we kind of look at what's going on here, it's moving up and then moving down. So this bandpass filter is the one that creates the most extreme difference of the sound. So if you really want to change the character of it, I'd modulate this bandpass filter. Just don't go too high up with it or it becomes too high frequency. And that's what I have going on here. It's not really going above, it's probably about like 50, 86. Okay, so yeah, I didn't really go above 86 because then it became too high frequency. And then I kind of have it moving downwards as the sound pitches down. Okay, and then the next one's a notch filter. This one's going pretty crazy because a notch filter is such a subtle movement. It just kind of adds a nice phasiness to the sound. Okay, so for this next part, which is this sort of pitch down effect right here, which sounds like this. So this is actually surprisingly simple to create. What I did was I took the delay time on the echo unit and brought it down all the way as it progresses. And whenever you have this keep pitch turned off, it will modulate the pitch of the sound whenever you change it, so you can actually pitch it up as well. The key for this sound is to modulate your feedback so that it kind of just feeds back into itself, and then you can kind of adjust the pitch with the time. So I turned the feedback up to 103%. So that would be pretty extreme for a regular delay setting, but with this, it kind of goes up and then feeds back and then sort of fades out as it pitches downwards. Final thing that I did with this echo unit was I took the dry-wet balance and turned it all the way up to 100%. So we have no delay going on here, and then as soon as that one little stab happens, the delay turns on, and then we get that pitch down effect. Alright, so the final thing that I did for the sound was just some simple EQing and cutting out 3.2 hertz with a gain of 6, pretty wide, and then I also cutting out a little bit of lows around 313 with a gain of negative 2.8. So this is just kind of just depending on what you're doing. This helps clean things up a little. Alright, so that's the patch finished up. I know it's kind of complicated, but what you can do is if you adjust the Maelstrom synth or change it to another synth, you can easily modify the patch and create a wide variety of modulated basses without having to go through all of these steps every single time. Because if you recreate this patch every single time you wanted like a Reese bass sound, it would take forever. But what I would do is I would just save this patch as a combinator, and then every single time you want to create one of these synths, you can just go ahead and throw either a Maelstrom in there or a Thor unit or an Antidote or whatever synthesizer you want, and you can easily get really advanced modulated basses without having to spend hours and hours of time. And this will just allow you to be more creative with the sound design because you don't have to worry about routing all of these different effects. Alright, so I hope that you liked the video. If you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Feel free to comment if you have any questions, because I know that this is a pretty complicated bass sound. And I'll also put it as a download in the description as well, so you can check it out, kind of go through it, look at the patch, and even just kind of, adjust it and modulate it further if you want to. So I hope you liked the video, and I will see you guys all next time.